The horror box. The visitors beneath the window. It began with soft tapping beneath the living room window, faint and irregular. At first, I thought it was branches, maybe the wind, but the pattern was two deliberate 3 knocks and silence, followed by a long drag across the siding. The next morning, I saw faint handprints on the glass-long fingers, smudged in something oily. I wiped them away, convincing myself it was a trick of condensation. But the marks returned that night, perfectly aligned, as if someone was measuring distance. I installed motion lights. Each time they triggered, the light revealed nothing, just the still yard and shadows of trees. But my phone, synced to the camera, showed brief flickers of movement, shapes too tall, bending and straightening like they were testing boundaries. Every night, the same rhythm played. Knock, drag, silence. Always beneath the same window, never louder than it needed to be, never enough to wake the neighbors. It was as if someone wanted only me to know they were there. I moved to sleep in another room, away from the window. That night, the sounds shifted, soft scraping beneath the new window. The same deliberate pace, the same measured timing. They weren't just knocking. They were tracking where I moved. The next morning, the basement door was unlocked. I never left it open. Inside, near the stairs, lay a pile of dirt and leaves, as though someone had carried handfuls from outside and arranged them into a small mound. No footprints, no tools, just intent. When I called the police, they found nothing. They humored me, checked windows and locks, but couldn't explain the smudges that returned every night. They told me it was likely condensation again. I knew better. Condensation doesn't follow you. Over the next week, the intrusions grew bolder. Someone left objects beneath the windows, a child's shoe, a snapped photograph of my own house, a rusted key. Each morning, something new waited, perfectly centered below the glass, like an offering or a warning. The tapping continued, always between 2 and 4 in the morning. I began counting seconds between knocks. Sometimes when I blinked, I thought I saw shadows shift behind the reflection. Always distant, always faint, like they were learning the rhythm of my fear. One night, I stayed awake on purpose, lights off, watching the glass. At 2:13, I saw movement slow, steady, deliberate. A figure crouched beneath the window, its head tilted upward, face hidden behind something pale and expressionless. Then, slowly, it stood and turned away. The next morning, the grass outside was flattened in a perfect semicircle, as if multiple people had stood in formation, facing the house. The handprints on the glass had multiplied. 10, maybe 12, all slightly different shapes and sizes. I covered the windows with heavy curtains, but the tapping never stopped. It grew sharper, more precise, like fingernails or the edge of a tool. Each night, they tested another wall, another part of the house, probing for weak points. I tried staying elsewhere for a few nights. Friends, hotels, anywhere but here. But when I returned, small signs proved they'd been inside. Items slightly moved, drawers open, faint footprints on the carpet, too small and narrow to be mine. The locks were never broken. The alarms never triggered. Yet I knew they entered. The air felt wrong, stale, occupied. I could smell earth, dust, and something faintly metallic, like rust or dried blood. Whatever they were, they didn't need to force their way in. The pattern became ritualistic, knocks at the same time. Objects left beneath the same window. Whispers, faint and rhythmically deliberate, sliding through the cracks in the foundation. Always low, always conversational, as if they were discussing my reactions. I set up cameras again, 6 this time, facing every side of the house. Each morning, footage showed the same thing static. For 4 minutes, between 2:11 and 2:15, the feed turned to grain, sound dropping into low interference. Then everything resumed normal. I realized they controlled what I could perceive. They wanted me to know they existed, but couldn't be recorded. They wanted control over what I saw, what I feared, what I believed. Their precision made randomness impossible. It was all deliberate design. The objects began changing. A photo of my own back door, printed and left beneath the window. A note reading almost inside. One morning, my phone was missing. Later, I found it on the patio, camera open, facing my bedroom window. I stopped leaving the house after dark. I moved furniture to block the windows, nailed boards across the basement door, sealed vents, and checked locks twice an hour. Still, the sounds persisted: soft scraping, gentle knocking, whispers that slid through walls. I called the police again. They inspected, took notes, told me to relax. They saw nothing wrong, no forced entry, no trespassing. But one officer stared too long at the window, his eyes wide, then said quietly, "Keep your lights on tonight." Then he left. That night, they escalated. The knocks turned to pounding. Something heavy slammed against the siding. The sound of running feet circled the house, faster and faster. I clutched a kitchen knife and sat by the door, waiting, counting every blow. At 3:02, silence. Then a single knock on the glass behind me. Slow, deliberate. When I turned, the curtains fluttered, and I saw the faintest outline of a face, white and smooth, pressed against the window. The eyes were hollow impressions, the mouth fixed in a grin. I screamed, but no sound came out. The lights flickered, and the figure leaned closer, hand dragging slowly down the glass. Then it vanished. The next morning, every window was covered in fingerprints, layered so thick the light barely came through. The following nights, no knocks came. Only silence and the sense of being watched from every angle. The house felt alive, breathing, expanding, waiting. I began hearing movement from within the walls, soft footsteps just beyond the drywall, the whisper of shifting dust. I tore apart parts of the house, searching for hidden entrances, crawl spaces, anything that explained their access. I found nothing, only hollow spaces and faint scrawls on insulation. Words carved in long, spidery letters. "You watch us too." The next night, the house went cold. Not just temperature, something deeper. The air was heavy, thick with static. Every light dimmed, then flickered. From beneath the window came a new sound. Slow breathing, drawn out and uneven, rising into laughter. I ran outside with a flashlight. Nothing. No footprints, no shadows. Yet when I turned toward the house, I saw movement behind the curtains. Figures, silhouettes, walking inside the living room. My living room, though I stood outside, keys in my hand. I stayed in my car until sunrise. When I finally went inside, everything was untouched. Nothing moved, nothing broken. But in the dust along the windowsill, words were written with a finger, almost inside. The same as before, only this time freshly traced. Now, each night, I hear them pacing beneath the windows, dragging their fingers across the siding. They whisper through the walls, just quiet enough that I can't make out the words. I try not to listen. I try not to respond. They don't want to kill me. I know that now. They want me awake. They want me aware. They want me to feel their presence in every reflection, every shadow, every pause between knocks. It's a game, and they're patient. Last night, the knocks stopped for good. But when I opened my curtains this morning, there was something new outside. A chair, centered beneath the window, facing inward, and on it my phone recording. The video shows me sleeping, filmed from inside the room. The horror box, the patio watchers. It began with a simple feeling. Eyes on me while I sat on the back patio, sipping coffee before sunrise. At first, I thought it was paranoia, a leftover from too many late nights and quiet streets. but instinct warned me otherwise. The next day, I noticed subtle changes. Stones along the edge of the patio were rearranged. Potted plants shifted slightly, small twigs placed like markers. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, just intentional marks meant to provoke awareness and fear. That evening, I installed a motion-sensitive light along the fence. Around midnight, the illumination triggered, casting shadows that darted across the yard. The figures were tall, featureless faces hidden behind smooth masks, standing perfectly still, waiting, watching each movement I made. I tried calling the police. By the time they arrived, nothing remained outside. No footprints, no marks, no evidence. They left unsure while I returned to the patio, alone but certain that something had been there, assessing, calculating, taunting. The following night, the intrusions escalated. I heard dragging along the deck, soft taps against the railings, a measured rhythm of movement designed to test my reactions. Each noise ended just before I could react, leaving my pulse racing and mind on edge. By the third night, it began leaving objects. A single glove on the chair I sat in, small stones arranged in geometric patterns, a note scrawled on a torn page. "We are patient. Are you?" I didn't touch it, terrified of what that acknowledgement might invite. Sleep became impossible. I stayed on the couch with all lights on, flashlight clutched. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves, sent spikes of adrenaline through my body. The patio, once safe, had become a theater for observation and deliberate fear. The fourth night, I tried to confront them. Peeking through blinds, I saw 3 figures crouched at the edge of the yard. No words, no gestures, just masks, blank and pale, reflecting the faint light. They didn't leave. They didn't move. They simply waited for me to act. I left the door slightly open, hoping to scare them away or prove presence. Instead, the next morning, the boards were scratched, not deeply, just enough to indicate careful exploration. Nothing else. No footprints inside. No sign of physical entry. Just subtle communication. I reinforced the patio door, added locks, installed cameras, monitored every inch of the yard, yet the visits continued. The tapping, the rustling, the subtle impressions in the dirt, all occurred without fail, always precise, always timed to the smallest detail. I tried to sleep elsewhere in the house, but the intrusions followed. Every night, the figures circled, unseen, leaving impressions and objects. They moved without sound until I noticed. Every time I acknowledged them, their behavior adapted, escalating, teaching, and punishing awareness. One night, I awoke to find the potted plants rearranged to form a path toward the patio door. I hadn't left the couch. No one else was in the house. My stomach churned as I realized they were testing the thresholds of perception in space without ever stepping inside. The pattern grew more unnerving. Items left in the yard, marks on furniture, impressions in the soil became more intricate, almost artistic. It wasn't random. It was a deliberate sequence, a silent language of observation and control I was forced to decipher. By the 8th night, they added sound. Soft footsteps along the siding, dragging along the patio floor, sometimes whispering, unintelligible, yet unmistakably human. The yard had transformed into an arena, a measured space for psychological domination. Neighbors began noticing odd shadows, small objects in yards, patterns of stones, and subtle marks on fences. No one understood the intent, and none could intervene. The figures remained elusive, patient, precise, always outside my reach, yet always within influence. Months passed. The intrusions continued nightly, evolving in subtlety and precision. They did not enter. They did not steal. They left a trail of anxiety, meticulously testing my attention and endurance, pushing boundaries of fear without breaking physical thresholds. I adapted my routines, avoided the patio, reinforced doors and windows, covered cameras with tape. Yet each night, the presence persisted. I could feel their calculations, their patience, the deliberate pacing of observation designed to erode my sense of safety. The figures began leaving more audacious signs. A single shoe placed on the patio steps, twigs arranged in patterns I hadn't seen before, marks on the siding that indicated careful exploration and understanding of my home structure. They were learning, teaching, and asserting dominance. I stopped documenting the intrusions. Recording their patterns seemed to encourage escalation. Observing them too closely felt dangerous, yet ignoring them was impossible. Every sound, every small anomaly became a test, a silent communication of presence and control. Sleep became impossible. I stayed alert, listening for soft scratches, footsteps, and subtle shifts. I realized that observation itself was the goal. They didn't need to enter. They only needed to provoke attention, awareness, and fear. Even distance provided no relief. When I left the house, the marks and subtle patterns would reappear, as if time and space mattered little. They existed outside normal constraints, adapting and responding to every attempt to evade them. The psychological toll became unbearable. Each day, I noticed the yard, the patio, the surrounding space with paranoia and hyper-awareness. I was part of the silent ritual, measured by beings whose intent I could not fully understand, yet whose persistence was undeniable. Eventually, I stopped looking. I stopped moving objects. I ceased responding to taps, scratches, or rearrangements. The figures continued their sequence, a silent, precise symphony of observation that dictated my life without ever crossing the threshold physically. Even now, months later, the patio remains a theater of psychological domination. Objects shift subtly, small patterns appear. Footsteps and taps echo faintly through the yard. The figures are always there, testing, observing, and enforcing their rules. They do not enter. They do not speak. They only wait, calculate, and measure. Every night is a lesson, a deliberate intrusion designed to keep me awake, alert, and aware. The patio, once safe, is now a proof of their control. I have learned not to challenge them, to remain still, unobservant, and cautious. Each sound, each faint shift, reinforces the reality. I am being watched by something methodical, patient, and entirely indifferent to my comfort. The fear is constant, unavoidable, and measured. It exists in the quietest hours before dawn, in the small gaps of observation, and in the objects they leave behind. A single mark, a stone, a scratch is enough to remind me that the sequence never ends. And so I live within the parameters they've set, anticipating, listening, calculating. Every night, I wait for subtle signs, knowing the patio, the yard, and the perimeter are not my own. They belong to the watchers who never enter, yet never leave. The horror box, the fence testers. It began with soft footfalls along the edge of the yard, late at night when the streetlights barely reached my property. I had finished dinner, washed the dishes, and settled into the living room, unaware that my life was about to change. The first night, I noticed subtle shifts. A garden gnome slightly moved, a single stone repositioned. At first, I blamed wind, animals, or clumsiness, but instinct told me otherwise. Someone or something was outside, examining my home, leaving marks to test awareness. I installed motion lights and cameras, hoping to catch a prankster. Nothing. At least nothing visible. The air felt charged, heavy with anticipation. Each night, the footfalls returned, precise, rhythmic, circling the perimeter, as if measuring my reaction and endurance. On the third night, I saw them. Shadows at the fence line, tall, narrow, impossibly still. No faces, only masks, smooth, pale, featureless. They didn't move toward the house. They didn't call out. They only stood, silently observing every lit window, every flicker of my movement. I left the porch light on to catch them in the act. The next morning, the camera feed had corrupted exactly during their presence. When the footage returned, the shadows were gone, yet footprints along the grass indicated their approach had been calculated, leaving behind no trace of retreat. By the fifth night, the intrusions escalated. Soft raps along the siding, deliberate scraping near the fence. Objects left scattered in patterns. A glove, a shoe, a small stone tower. They never stole anything. They only pushed, tested, and waited for me to notice. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Each time I closed my eyes, I imagined movements at the perimeter, shadows bending with impossible precision. I started hearing whispers outside, faint, teasing, drawing attention to spaces I couldn't defend or observe. I attempted to confront them. I opened the back door slightly, flashlight in hand, calling out. Silence, not even a footstep. Yet the next morning, more items. Notes scribbled with tiny, precise letters. We measure. My breath caught. They were aware, patient, and unrelenting. I moved furniture against windows, boarded doors, reinforced locks. Still, they persisted. Every morning revealed subtle changes. Impressions on the siding, patterns in the gravel, small shifts I hadn't made. Every alteration seemed designed to prove observation, to remind me they had access. Cameras showed only flickering static at night. No shape, no movement. Yet I could hear soft scraping outside, brushing along the wood. Occasionally, a pause, as if they were listening to me listen, anticipating my next move, testing my limits. Weeks passed. They began leaving more audacious items. A doll face pressed against the window frame. Stones forming geometric patterns in the flower beds. Each token was precise, deliberate, designed to unnerve and demonstrate complete control over the space surrounding me. I tried to leave, slept at a friend's house, thought distance would help. The first night away, I heard them. Not in my yard, but outside, a rhythm of tapping on the walls of the guest room. Soft, measured, impossible to locate definitively. They could follow anywhere. Returning home was worse. The yard bore new signs of intrusion. Subtle footprints, marks on the siding, the faint imprint of hands pressed where I had not been. They were testing, assessing, learning the layout, the patterns of my attention, the precise edges of my fear. I stopped leaving doors unlocked. I barricaded even the smallest window. Yet they adapted. They never forced entry. They never threatened directly. Their methods were psychological, predicated on observing reactions, testing my tolerance, and demonstrating that boundaries were meaningless to them. Sleep became impossible. My routines altered. Even the smallest sound, wind, a branch falling, a distant car, triggered the fear that the intruders had returned. Each step outside the bedroom, each glance toward the windows, became a test of endurance. I attempted to map their movements. Each night, the footfalls, raps, and brushes followed predictable sequences. 3 paces along the fence, 2 along the siding, a pause near the porch. It became a pattern, a ritual, an intelligence that communicated through noise and absence. The first time I tried to respond, mimicking the pattern with taps against my walls, the air shifted. Silence fell heavier than any previous pause. And then, faint whispers, too soft to understand, came from outside. A warning, a game, or a promise. I could not tell which. The escalation became physical. I found scratches along the siding, impressions on doorknobs, and subtle dents in the railing. Nothing violent, nothing stolen. Each mark was intentional, testing limits of attention and endurance, a patient, methodical intrusion into my perception of safety. Neighbors began to comment. One saw figures standing still, obscured by shadows, at the edge of the yard. Another noticed small, odd patterns in the gravel, unfamiliar to their property, but similar to those I documented. Yet no one could intervene. No one could stop them. Months passed. The intrusions continued nightly, evolving, adapting to my defenses. I understood now they weren't after theft, speech, or attack. They were predators of patience, stalking attention, feeding on awareness, and the psychological tension of measured fear. I stopped recording, stopped trying to catch them. Observing them directly was pointless. They were always aware of me, always adjusting, always testing. Each item left behind was a message. We exist. We know we are here. Every day, my world narrowed. I walked lightly, listening for the faintest tap, brush, or scrape. Even the faintest alteration in the wind or shadows could signal presence. I had become hyper-aware, my life dictated by anticipation, guided by patterns I could never fully control. Even now, weeks later, the marks persist. Imprints in the yard, subtle scratches on the porch, faint disturbances in objects I didn't move. They do not need entry. Observation alone is enough to maintain influence, to drive a careful balance of terror and restraint. I've learned not to sleep deeply, not to ignore patterns. Every time I attempt rest, the movements begin again, testing the edges of my perception, forcing alertness. I've become a participant in a silent ritual I cannot leave. They do not communicate verbally. They leave no notes tonight, yet the rhythm continues, invisible and inevitable. I live under the knowledge that every action, every glance, every step is measured, recorded, and interpreted by something patient, intelligent, and utterly relentless. Their goal is not violence. Their goal is control, psychological domination through persistence and subtlety. The fence testers have shown that fear is most effective when it's invisible, unprovable, and persistent, gnawing at the mind in the quiet hours before dawn. And so I remain, awake, alert, listening for patterns in the night, knowing the yard is never empty. They are still there, always observing, measuring, and waiting for the moment I falter, the moment I miscalculate, the moment I acknowledge their presence fully. The horror box, the knock sequence. It began as a mistake, a noise I thought I'd imagined. 3 slow knocks on the front door at exactly 3:12 a.m. The rhythm was calm, patient, and deliberate, not the random banging of someone desperate for attention. At first, I ignored it. No one visits at that hour. I told myself it was the wind, maybe a loose shutter, anything but the truth, that something intelligent was standing on my porch, waiting for me to acknowledge it. The next night, it happened again. 3 knocks, same rhythm. I checked the peephole, nothing. Porch light burned bright, yet there was no movement, no shadows, no sound beyond those perfectly timed knocks that echoed in my bones. I stayed up the 3rd night. I wanted to prove it was coincidence, some natural noise. But when the clock hit 3:12, the sound came again. Same pattern, same pause between each knock. This time, softer, like fingertips brushing wood. I recorded it on my phone. When I played it back, the knocks were faintly distorted, like something wet striking the door instead of solid. In the background, a slow breath, drawn in and held, waiting for me to respond. I didn't sleep after that. Every creak, every shift of the house felt deliberate. I left the porch light on all night. But by dawn, it had burned out, bulb unscrewed halfway, lying on the ground like it had been placed there intentionally. By the 5th night, I was unraveling. The knocks came again. This time, 4 instead of 3. The sequence had changed, and something about that small difference felt like communication or escalation. I whispered through the door, "Who's there?" Silence followed. But just before I stepped away, I heard something faint, a single word whispered through the wood. Listening, I froze. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a calm acknowledgement that my voice had crossed some invisible line. The next morning, footprints appeared across the porch. Bare, long, and narrow, like someone had stood there for hours. The wood was damp with condensation, yet only one set of prints existed. No approach, no retreat, just stillness. That evening, I stacked furniture against the door and turned off every light. The knocks came anyway, louder now, shaking the frame. Between each set, I heard the sound of dragging, something moving along the exterior wall, circling the house. I called the police. They found nothing. Probably pranksters, they said. But the tone in the officer's voice told me he didn't believe that either. He glanced at the door before leaving, eyes narrowing at the indentations left behind by unseen hands. Night 8, I set a trap, flower across the porch, camera facing the door. The next morning, the flower was disturbed, patterns etched into it. 3 circles, 1 cross, perfectly symmetrical. The camera recorded static for exactly 5 minutes during the event. Each following night, the knocks multiplied. 3, 4, 5, each set faster than before. The rhythm almost musical, almost conversational. I stopped checking the door. I knew they wanted me to react, to open it, to engage. But on night 12, something changed. The sound didn't come from the door anymore. It came from the inside wall, opposite where the knocks had always started. 3 precise raps, perfectly timed, coming from within the living room. I tore the drywall apart. Nothing. No holes, no signs of entry, just an empty cavity filled with stale air. But that night, the knocks moved again, now following me from room to room, always 3 beats behind wherever I stood. The pattern evolved. Tap on window, knock on floor, soft thud from attic. Every surface, every angle of the house became part of a ritual rhythm I couldn't escape. I began hearing faint humming between each series, as if they were pleased I hadn't left. Neighbors started avoiding me. One said she'd seen figures standing by my porch, tall, still shapes with blank faces, watching the house for hours. She assumed I was entertaining guests. When I told her the truth, she moved out the next week. By week 3, I'd stopped eating properly. The knocks no longer startled me. They guided me, dictating when to move, when to pause. I realized that every time I ignored them, the next set grew closer, louder, more insistent. I experimented. One night, I mimicked the rhythm back, 3 knocks of my own. The house went silent for hours. I thought I'd won, that maybe acknowledgement broke the pattern. But just before sunrise, they replied. This time, not with knocks, with words. A whisper pressed through every wall simultaneously. You understand now. Then the sound of slow retreating footsteps, dozens of them, fading into nothing beyond the fence line. The following day, I packed my things. I moved to a motel an hour away, a silence that was unbearable. On the first night, I almost relaxed. Until, at 3:12 a.m., the sound came again. 3 gentle knocks against the motel door. I froze. Different building, different town, yet the same exact pattern. I didn't answer, didn't breathe, just stared as the shadow under the door darkened, as though someone was leaning close enough to listen. The next morning, the motel clerk asked if I'd had guests. He'd seen someone outside my door on the security feed. They just stood there, he said. Didn't move, didn't blink. Stayed for 20 minutes. When I asked to see the footage, it was gone. Now, wherever I go, the knocks follow. They've become a kind of heartbeat in the walls, a rhythm I live with. I've learned that it's not about the sound. It's about connection. Once you hear the pattern, you're marked. It spreads through attention. Each person who listens too closely, each one who tries to count the knocks or mimic them, they inherit the sequence. The moment you acknowledge it, you become part of it. I've stopped telling people. I keep moving. But sometimes, when I drive through unfamiliar towns late at night, I see lights flicker in houses I've never entered. And I know, somewhere inside, someone else is hearing the same 3 knocks. And they'll open the door eventually. Everyone does.